Welcome to Suffolk Matters, where all of Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News, opinions, and insights you won't hear anywhere else. Here's your host, the president of New York's largest independent union, Suffolk AME's Dan Levler.
Welcome to another edition of Suffolk Matters on Walk 97.5 and 94.3 The Shark, where Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News and views you can't hear anywhere else. So my guest this morning is Senator Phil Boyle. Good morning.
Good morning, Dan. Good to be here.
Likewise, and that's saying a lot these days. So before we jump in on some issues that I wanted to talk to you about, I just want to, for our listeners, get some of your history. Obviously, you're a senator now, and have been for quite some time. But public service is in your blood. You've always, I guess, kind of been someone in service to something bigger than just yourself. So I wanted to get into a little bit of your history without leading you one way or the other. Just let us know how you got started and how you got where you are now.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, it's interesting because when I first started in politics many years ago, the state senators, for example, had a lot of seniority. So when I first started in the assembly in the 90s, the Long Island Nine, as they called them, there were 9 Republican state senators. The most junior one was there for 20 years, and they went up to over 40 from there.
Wow.
If I'm fortunate enough to be reelected, I will be the most senior senator from Long Island, and have been there for 8 years. So times have changed, a lot of turnover, more than usual, interesting enough. Yeah.
Yes.
So what my background is, I grew up in East Islip, and I think, did not come from a political family. My father worked at Grumman, my mother was a nurse. But we always talked about the, current events, and at that time was the Vietnam War, things like that at the dinner table. It got me interested in it. Studied political science, and then after law school and grad school, I went and worked on Capitol Hill in Washington for 5 years. I was what's called the legislative director there for a congressman from upstate New York, and then most recently I was the chief of staff for our former congressman around here. You probably remember Rick Lazio.
Right.
And so I did that for 5 years, and then I ran for the New York State Assembly, where I served for 16 years on and off, and then I was elected to the state Senate 8 years ago. It's interesting. I've always had a pledge that I would never serve more than 10 consecutive years. So in the Assembly, I left after 9 years. And then 3 years later, they asked me to come back and run from my old seat. So I did that, and I ended up serving 16 years. But you're right. I think public service is in my blood. And it sounds really corny, Dan, but I've always been the type that helping people makes me feel good. That's what motivates me. I'm really never been motivated by money, much to my wife's chagrin. But that's what does it. And one thing, as you know, in public service, you can do is help people, and it's a good thing to do every day.
Yeah, no, and you're speaking to somebody that understands that. It sometimes is a disconnect when I have conversations with people and they say, why do you do this? Why do you do this to yourself and all that's involved in it? And so I understand that, yes. the driving, the impetus behind this whole thing is to help as many people as possible and represent their needs and their wants.
Right. And the same with you and your membership. You talk about public service, people helping people. I'm sure the vast majority of your members could make more money in the private sector doing something, but helping individuals is in their blood, and what motivates them on a daily basis to do the great job they do. So.
Yeah, our membership is nothing if not altruistic. They take great pride in the fact that they are, as a function of government, helping as many people as possible. Now, in addition to that level of public service, you've also been involved in the fire service for quite some time.
Yes, I've been a 23-year member of the Great River Fire Department, and you see that all over Long Island and throughout New York State. The vast majority of firefighters in our state and across our country are volunteers. And even after 23 years, I'm always in awe of other individuals. I was in Deer Park last night giving a certificate, a proclamation to a gentleman who had 50 years of service with the Deer Park Fire Department.
Wow.
His name is Mike Palmo, and he still answers 392 calls a year.
Wow.
After 50 years. Most of the old-timers are kind of slowing down a little bit, but not Mike Palmo.
He's still going, yeah. Well, and there's something unique to the fire service because you know what you're signing up for, right? One, it's volunteerism. Sometimes it's hard to get people to, volunteer, a little time at school, to help the community or, pick up, like an athletic coaching or something like that.
Right.
But, in the fire service, you're literally volunteering to go into very dangerous situations to get the training and then put yourself in harm's way to help people. So it's just an aspect of who you are that, I've experienced of you that I just wanted to get out into the world.
Thank you.
So, with all of that experience behind you now, I guess, setting us up for why, why you have the take you have on things. I want to just jump into a few topics that I think are going to be very important for people. And it may not be things that, like yourself and your family when you were younger were talking about around the dinner table, but it will have an impact on everyone to the point where they will be talking about it around the dinner table, but maybe not in the context of getting in front of it, but like, how did this happen? And that's why you have elected representatives, getting in front of these issues. So issue number one, obviously the pandemic has had a huge impact on so many aspects of life. But as a state elected representative, the budget is definitely going to be something that has to be looked at. And as you know, Suffolk County as a region, Nassau County as well, relies on the state for certain levels of aid, like the state would rely on the federal government for certain levels of aid to get all of its work done. How do you think the state budget is going to be impacted? There's talk about 20% cut across the board in aid to localities, but just your take.
Yeah, obviously, and the pandemic has had a huge, not only a health impact in our region and nation, but also financially for our tax revenues and government funding. What Governor Cuomo has said not long ago was that he was going to have to make a 20% cut, as you say, in aid to localities, hurting the different counties throughout New York State and also villages and cities, but also 20% to our schools, and anybody can, any municipality can tighten their belt a little bit, that's done typically in a tough financial year, but 20% is insane, and that just simply cannot be allowed to stand. And we've pushed back against the governor's proposal for that. We as elected officials in Albany need to say we are going to not take those budget cuts. One of the problems, as you know, Dan, is that the governor has these emergency powers now. We as a legislator gave Governor Cuomo emergency powers at the beginning of the pandemic, beginning of March, as we should have. Right. We were about to start climbing the mountain, as he said. And so he had to make some very quick decisions. We gave him that emergency power, and we went up the mountain, and now we're back down. And everyone knows we're very low in level with the number of coronavirus cases, particularly out here on Long Island. And I believe, and many of my colleagues in the legislature believe, it's time to take those emergency powers back. It's time for the legislature to start acting like a co-equal branch of government. Unfortunately, it gets to some partisan voting on that. Some of the majority members in the Senate and the Assembly stick with the governor to have him allowed to keep those powers. We've offered, on my side of the aisle, I've offered amendments to say, okay, time for the legislature to take it back. And what Cuomo will typically say is, oh, no, what if there's a second wave, God forbid? I agree, but if there's a second wave, we can just simply give him the powers back again. We can do that in an hour on a Zoom vote. So it's time for us to, as a legislature, both the Senate and the Assembly, to say, Governor Cuomo, we're going to make any cuts decisions with you or find other revenue sources with you as a co-equal branch of government.
Yeah, and I want to jump into that partisan issue a little bit. Everybody knows there are Democrats and there are Republicans, and districts, they vote how they feel, right? Nobody's a Republican because they think the Republican Party is bad. No one's a Democrat because they think the Democratic Party is bad. But there's difference in philosophies, and certain regions have an abundance of, representation because that's the feeling of that area. So someone like yourself, elected as a Republican and representing your district, to have your voice cut out on partisan issues is a disservice to the people, and that's the thing, and I always harp on this. I think that's the thing that people like least about politics is when you start getting into these partisan issues. I don't care who's got what philosophy. Get the best and the brightest, put them in the room, work out the issue, come up with the best solution, and then say everybody did it. Let's not worry about whether it was the Democrats or the Republicans. But it is a very important point that you bring up. At what point in time do we get away from these emergency powers and these emergency authorizations and get the elected representatives that, were designed into this system to be the voice of the people, to get them back into the process?
You're absolutely right, Dan. And I look at it from a perspective of we have a large percentage of us in the middle, shall we say. I would consider myself, say, a moderate Republican, to say we have a large percentage. There's extremes on both sides, far to the right, far to the left, and the legislature, obviously. But most of us are kind of in the middle. And we can work together with the governor, to say, okay, look, we come up with a state budget every year. It's $170+ billion. We can handle this situation as well. And we're doing that as you do it with your members, whatever it is,
Sure.
whether it's your office budget or, we're dealing with the government agency that your members work for. That happens all the time. We can get the job done, but we need to have a voice. And everyone needs to be in the room with a voice, and I think that's the important aspect of it, particularly now as we face these tremendous financial difficulties for our state.
Sure, and speaking of that catchphrase, partisan issues, the federal government obviously rife with partisan issues right now. We all see and hear all about it all the time. But to what extent is federal aid going to be important for elected officials like yourself to work through the issues in this coming budget cycle?
I think it's going to be tremendously important, and Washington is literally the only place that can print money. The pandemic unfortunately has cost trillions of dollars already, and may cost that much more again. But we have to save lives. We have to protect Americans, and New Yorkers. And when we ask them for federal aid, I do believe there's going to be an aid package for the state, for the counties, for the localities, coming out of Washington. Obviously, it's a difficult time because we have the presidential election coming up. Whether it's going to happen before or after that is the only question. Governor Cuomo keeps saying, well, we need to wait to see what Washington's going to do, and he has been waiting, understandably. But at some point in time, we got to say, okay, we got to do it ourselves and get a check after the fact, from Washington. We know it's coming. It's just a matter of when it's going to be coming.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there is also talk about, what other initiatives are there, right? So when you talk about contingencies in a budget, generally speaking, 3 to 5% is all that ever gets really built in, whether it's corporate or municipal. So when you talk about a 20% cut out of the budget, that's way outside of people's contingencies. But there's other ways to find revenue sources, and one of them that I found interesting, something that you've shown support for, is taxation on very high earners, people earning like $5 to $100 million a year, maybe adjusting their tax rate proportionately to kind of aid in all of this. And rather than getting into what that means and why, I'll toss it to you. Just give us an overview.
Yeah, as a fiscal conservative, I've always been opposed to tax increases, generally speaking. But I think this is, in normal times, I would not support a tax increase. However, these are not normal times.
Right.
And so there's a couple different proposals in the state legislature. One is what they call a pied-à-terre tax on wealthy homes in New York City owned by foreigners. Other things, I support tax on ultra-wealthy. It would slightly increase the state income tax on people who are now making over $5 million a year in income. And there's 3 levels. There's one for over $5 million, there's one for over $10 million, and there's one for people making over $100 million a year. Now, I support a sunset provision in that. I mean, some people say we should just have it that way forever. I'm a little concerned about chasing away the wealthy people to move out of the state. But during these economic crises, I think that those people, and I don't know who's possibly making that much money in the worst economy since the Depression, but for those people, I think they would say, okay, I'm willing to make a sacrifice to help the state of New York and its residents and my neighbors get through this difficult time for the next year or two, whatever it's going to take to get through the pandemic, and then we'll sunset it and go back to the lower levels. It's amazing how much money you can raise in this, billions of dollars, just by increasing the tax on those making over $500,000. It's only 0.5% increase on their state tax. And then I think if they're making over $10 million, it's 1% increase. And then if you're making over $100 million, it's 1.5% increase for your state tax, income tax. So it's not a lot of money for people that are making that much money, and obviously will help out many of us, both with our services that needed to be done for our residents and also, of course, our schools.
And, just to put that in perspective for a second, when you say you're not really someone who has supported tax increases, that goes back for 25 years now. I can't find any record of you voting for a tax increase or, so this being the one that you decided to get behind really says something. And in addition to that, people hear about, the Amazons of the world, the higher echelon up there and the trillions of dollars that they're making. We're talking about a very small handful of people contributing a very little bit more that would probably have no impact on their ability to do everything and anything that they've been doing and have enjoyed the benefits of New York State and what New York State is. And chosen to locate here specifically because of New York State and what New York State is. So this is not, to me at least, this is not some crazy attempt to push out wealthy New Yorkers that will somehow, harm all of us. It's just saying, hey, listen, we need a little help. And like you said, you build into the mechanics of the document a sunset provision that says, hey, once this crisis is abated, we revert. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Dan. I don't think anybody is going to be moving as a result of it. And obviously, we've all read in the paper what's happening now, whether it's because of the pandemic or whether because it's maybe some civil unrest. There are many people moving from Manhattan out to Suffolk County, out to the Hamptons, right?
Sure.
Some wealthy individuals, which is going to play into a lot of this. But so they do not want to move to Florida. They want to move to some southern state. The taxes may be lower there, and they may not have a slight increase, but they want to be in New York. They want to be around the excitement of Long Island and New York City. So I do not believe, particularly with the sunset, they're going to be going anywhere.
No, again, I'm not in that position, but if I was, I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't. I don't know. I can't speak for them, but there is something very magical about New York State, and New York State is a region, going from urban, suburban, rural. I mean, there is so much to experience in life just in the state of New York. So, but moving on to revenue streams in general, are there other than the millionaire's tax, are there other items that could be looked at to kind of help generate a stable budget for 2021? Yeah,
there has been some discussions about changing the overall tax system, whether it's going towards more of an income based from property taxes, for example. These things have been discussed for decades, literally. So I don't know if it's going to be occurring, especially in this difficult time. I think from our overall perspective, though, for government services, it's probably going to be something out of Washington. And we see the economy starting to turn around already. God willing, we're never going to see another second wave of this. Even the unemployment numbers are coming down dramatically from the height of the pandemic. And the economy seems to be at least starting to get back to normal. And that's going to be where the regular revenue sources, which have funded it so well for so long, are probably going to kick back in again. That's my hope.
Yeah, and it's something that I always, kind of comment on. When we had the shutdown, there was a halt to all of the things in life that you want to do. But the things that you had to do, the things that you needed to do, you could still do. So in terms of an economic shutdown, there was a shutdown. Restaurants weren't available. You couldn't go to the movies. These were common sense decisions, first and foremost, to preserve human life. I think that was a good move. But you needed food for your family. You didn't need some storage shed in the backyard and hope that you were stocked up for the winter. You could go out and you could get stuff, and all the work necessary to get the food, manufactured, packaged, distributed, and available for purchase. All of that was still going on. So while there's serious numbers, that we're talking about, and serious decisions are going to have to be made because of that impact. Things were still moving. America didn't literally sit in their homes for 90 days and not leave. There was, precautions put in place, but there was work getting done, and the ability to get the things that you needed done got done.
Right. And obviously a lot of the essential workers kept their going to work, and many of them your members,
Sure.
and putting their health and safety and lives really at risk as the heroes that they are. They were able to necessarily perform their jobs, but also, as you say, getting the substance that they need, whether it's going to the grocery stores and stuff like that. We took the precautions we needed, the social distancing and mask, obviously, and we took it very seriously. Which is why the Suffolk County numbers are so incredibly low compared to other places that may not be, or maybe having little boomlets of outbreaks of coronavirus now. So.
Sure. And as someone that spent some time in the fire service, quite a few years, you understand the concept that there is no bravery without fear. Anyone who doesn't realize the danger could run into a dangerous situation. But if you know the dangerous situation, you've got to be brave to go into it. AME members, essential workers everywhere, they knew the dangers. They were hearing about the dangers. They were able to see, firsthand, especially, when we deal with, like our epidemiologists in Suffolk County and those folks that were working in the health industry. They could see firsthand what COVID did. They knew firsthand why they should be afraid. They showed up to work anyway. They did their job, and they kept this region, this state, and this country moving. All while being brave.
Yep.
So there is a lot to be said for that.
No question, and they're true heroes, absolutely.
Moving on from, I guess, the fiscal issues with COVID and just getting into some issues that happened pre-COVID that are of concern with public safety and just I guess the difference between common sense legislation and let's hurry up and just get anything done, at least that's my opinion. I want to get into, bail and discovery reform. And, discovery really, to me, that's definitely a big one. We talk a lot about bail, and I would like to talk about bail, but discovery specifically is that period of time that the district attorney's office has to compile all their information and present whatever evidence they may have on a particular case to a defendant. And again, public workforces aren't designed to have such redundancy and overstaffing that, if all of a sudden the workload spikes, oh, don't worry, we'll just call in the extra 1,000 people we have.
Right.
So to move from what was a generous discovery period down to 15 days, I don't want to say what I thought of that, but it wasn't really a smart move. But I just want to get your take on efforts that may be being made to correct some of those issues that were created.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I'll tell you, there was so much media attention and discussion focused on the bail reform, which we know was an obvious disaster as passed. When that first came out in Albany, they've been talking about it for a number of years. I remember the Judiciary Committee, and we looked at that for a number of years. We didn't ever pass it until this year, when perhaps some more extreme members in their philosophy took over the control in the Senate. But when it was first proposed, they said, okay, well, how about, we have to do low-level offenses. And unanimously, we agreed with that. Should someone be spending weeks, if not months, in jail waiting for their trial because they were, some young adult selling pot on the corner? Absolutely not. People were losing their jobs because they couldn't go to work. That was crazy. We needed to change that system. So it was proposed as for low-level, nonviolent offenses for bail reform. Okay, that sounds reasonable. But then the list of charges come out that they were going to put into the law. Of course, I've never been a prosecutor. I'm an attorney, but I've never been a prosecutor or a defense attorney. So right away I call my friends who are prosecutors, defense attorneys, police officers, and I say, what about this list of crimes being on? And every one of them, even the defense attorneys, were saying, that's crazy. You cannot have all these crimes on there because you're going to let violent people out. Some of these are violent people on the street and getting out, or there were people, punching people on the street and that afternoon. One guy robbed 5 banks and was let out to rob a 6th bank. So it was too extreme, and the legislation went way too far. The same we see with discovery reform, quote unquote. Discovery, obviously, is when a prosecutor needs to give the defense attorney any exculpatory evidence or evidence that would prove the innocence of the defense attorney's clients so they have a fair trial. New York was always very bad at it. They actually didn't have to give it to them until like the day before the trial. Sometimes boxes worth of evidence the defense attorney didn't have time to go through before the trial started. So it was fair to say, okay, we're going to make the prosecutors give the evidence that would help their clients to the defense attorneys earlier. However, again, the extreme position of saying they had to do it in 15 days. Absolutely insane. Very much impossible for these prosecutors to give all their evidence over on all their cases to the defense attorneys in 15 days. To the extent that I spent the day with the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office when this was being proposed, and they believed that they were going to have to drop the charges on half of the crimes in Suffolk County. Out of 7,000, they were going to have to drop half of them at least because they just simply couldn't do the paperwork, as many members know.
Yeah. And how do you make that decision? You know, as the district attorney, how do you make that decision without going through the process? Just simply say, okay, arbitrarily, anything of this offense or less, you know, we'll have to drop. That's tough to find justice for the people. You know, these crimes are perpetrated by somebody, and you know, you got to get to the bottom of it. But then there are victims of those crimes as well. And how do those victims get justice when the district attorney's office has got to drop everything? Yeah,
that's right. And so I had introduced legislation to actually change it to 45 days, which everyone felt was much more reasonable. But they're still going through that. Of course, the pandemic hit, so we haven't been able to rectify this legislation. I hope we are able to. But another problem with this, Dan, is that because the defense attorneys will now get a list of the witnesses without many protections for them, they're going to get the list of the witnesses who are going to be testifying against their client. So we had a case in Albany a couple weeks ago where, sure enough, the prosecutor gave the name to the defense attorney, and that person's name was on YouTube an hour later.
Oh, my Lord.
Basically saying, go get this person, you know, he's going to rat out somebody, you know, and threatening them. So who's going to come forward to testify against somebody to stop a criminal when they know that their safety or their family safety may be put at risk because of social media? So there's a lot of work to do to fix this legislation quickly.
Yeah, you know, and I had heard of another nightmare scenario where, you know, if someone were to break into your home, say they snuck in through the window of your kid's bedroom and stole some stuff, that they would have the right to go into your home and inspect, you know, the crime scene, so to speak. That I don't know how the average person would feel about that.
And worse than that, even for a sexual assault, somebody comes in the bedroom and God forbid rapes a family member or sexually assaults a family member. The defense team has an opportunity to go in. You have to get out of the house. They go in and inspect the room. You know, you actually got to move out because it's a crime scene. It's a crazy it's a crazy law, and it's not one. Everyone talks about bail reform, as I said, but discovery reform is just as bad.
It's very, very important. So, you know, we've got a little bit of time left, and I did just want to jump into. There's a couple of more things I wanted to talk about, but you know, we ran out of time. But I do want to talk about, you know, what happened with Tropical Storm Isaias and the PSE&G response, and just get your quick thoughts on whether or not, you know, we're still in hurricane season. If something happens, do you feel like the ratepayers should be comfortable that changes have been made with the hearings, the various discussions, efforts made, you know, on the state level to try and fix this issue?
Yeah, the tropical storm proved some big problems with the system, you know, and we did hold some hearings in the Senate and the Assembly on this with PSE&G and other utilities to highlight those issues. I heard from hundreds and hundreds of constituents who were out of power for far too long. But I think one of the real problems was also the technology. I mean, so many people were calling our office, our Senate office, and my colleagues in government to say, I can't get through. I've called PSE&G literally nonstop for 3 days, and I haven't been able to get through. That's a problem. And incredibly, when they got through, I have a number of constituents who would call, finally get through to PSE&G after 3 days, and the person on the other line would say, oh, no, you still have power. So during the hearing, I told the president of PSE&G, look, if anything, you got to fix that system. So you guys know who's out of power when they're not arguing the person who's just spent 3 days, you know, without power and calling your office to say they're wrong. So they understand there's a problem, and I think that we're going to stay on them. I think we'll have follow-up hearings in the coming months to make sure that they're doing the right thing for the next season.
No, that's great. And, I really appreciate you carving some time out this morning to speak with us about these various issues. It sounds like we've got a lot more that we can get to, so at a future date and time, we'll come back and get to all the rest. But my guest this morning was Senator Phil Boyle. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dan. Good to be here.
And for our listeners, we'll speak to you next week. See you next week. See you next week. See you next week.